Today on Sugar Spun Run, we'll be making my favorite confetti cake. Hey Sugar Spun Bakers, Sam here, and today I am so excited to be sharing another carefully tested, well-researched, and perfected recipe. I really can't believe I don't already have a video for this recipe. I developed this one years ago in my old teeny tiny dark kitchen, and it has withstood the test of time. And that's because it's just an incredible cake. It's classic with a plush white crumb. It's peppered with all of these fun, colorful sprinkles. It definitely tastes like nostalgia to me. I think it will for a lot of you too. And I'm just really excited about it, which is why I keep using my hands. So we're going to go ahead and get started by preheating our oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Next, you're going to want to grab yourself a large mixing bowl. Make sure it is a big one. We're going to be making a lot of batter because this is a pretty big cake. It's a 3-layer cake. The first ingredient you need is 9 tablespoons of softened, unsalted butter. I know 9 tablespoons is kind of annoying because you have to cut into another stick. I don't do these things just to annoy you. The recipe needs 9 tablespoons of butter. We're going to use an electric mixer now just to beat the butter up a little bit until it's a little creamy. The next thing we're going to need is sugar. This is 3 cups of granulated sugar. Some people are not going to like that because it's a lot of sugar, but this is, again, a big 3-layer cake. You can cut yourself a tiny sliver of it. So we'll add this in with the butter. We're also going to add oil. You need a cup of a neutral cooking oil for today's recipe. Now, vegetable oil and canola oil are the traditional choices, the less expensive choices, and they are going to be more likely to give you that bright white crumb. Today I am using avocado oil, which will also work nicely here, but it is going to give my cake a little bit less of that bright white hue. It should still be pretty nice and white though. Drizzle that right in. Now we're going to cream everything together until we have a nice light and fluffy mixture. That only takes a minute there, and now we're going to add our flavoring. So this recipe, it's a big cake, it uses a lot of vanilla extract. You will need 4 teaspoons. So classic vanilla extract does have a brownish color to it, and it will turn your cake, it will keep it from being pure snow white. What I use in this cake is typically clear vanilla, which is an imitation vanilla, but it's going to keep my cake that brighter color we're looking for. This brand is a new one I bought. It actually still has a little bit of that brownish color to it, but if you can find a pure white brand, that's even better. We'll add this in and we'll mix it up. And in case you're wondering, you can use that regular vanilla extract. Your cake just will be a little bit less pure white. All right, this is looking beautiful. Just set that aside, and we're going to set our wet ingredients aside. Now you're going to need a separate mixing bowl for your dry ingredients. Grab yourself a whisk too. To this bowl, we are going to add 4 cups plus 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. Why I didn't just start with the flour in that bowl, I don't know. Sometimes I don't always make sense. Here we are. Next, you're going to need 4½ teaspoons of baking powder. Yes, it sounds like a lot. Again, this is a big cake. And finally, for our dry ingredients, 1½ teaspoons of salt. This is just table salt. And we will whisk everything together. All right, our dry ingredients are prepped. Let's bring back our wet ingredients from just a second ago. And another thing you are going to need is 1½ cups of whole milk. Now, ideally, all of these ingredients that you're using today should be at room temperature. That's something you can do to really help ensure that your cake batter is going to combine nicely and you get a nice smooth batter that bakes evenly. We are going to alternate adding the dry ingredients and the milk to our wet ingredients. I always start and end with the dry ingredients, so I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of that right now. And I am going to use my mixer for this step, but I want to take a moment to stress to you that you don't want to overmix this batter. I'm going to keep things pretty low and slow, and I'm going to stir just until the flour is pretty much combined. I'll show you how that looks, of course. So my flour is just about combined, so I'll add some of my milk. And I'll usually do the flour in 4 or 5 parts and the milk in 3 or 4 parts. So once again, low and slow, just until that milk is pretty much combined, not completely necessarily. We'll add more flour, mix again. Mostly combined, so we'll add some more milk. More flour. And now I'm just going to add the rest of my milk. Just drizzle that in. And I am making sure my beaters are touching the bottom of the bowl and that I'm getting near the sides because I want to make sure everything's getting well incorporated. And then finally, I was going to try to do that one-handed, but I think I'd end up breaking something. We'll add the last of our flour mixture. And again, we'll just stir gently. All right, now I want to take a second to scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl. This is a large mixing bowl. We want to make sure we don't have any wet or dry ingredients hiding out there that haven't been well combined. We want our batter to be nice and uniform, and it should be pretty smooth, especially if you used all room temperature ingredients. This looks pretty good, and I don't want to overdo it. So before you think we're ready to add our sprinkles and pop this cake mix in the oven, we are not just yet. We have one more critical ingredient. Grab my large mixing bowl. You probably have noticed we haven't yet added any eggs, and you really need them for this cake. But we are only going to be using egg whites. Now you need 9 of them. I know that's a lot. I do recommend you save your yolks, use them for a lemon curd or whatever you'd like, but if you can avoid wasting them, that's great. Or you can feed them to your dog. Either, I do that sometimes too. Now those of you who have made any of my recipes that use egg whites in the past, you know the drill. You always need to crack them into a completely clean and completely dry bowl. You do not want to get any yolk in with the white. I'm just going to show you how I crack my eggs and separate them really quickly. Some of you have seen this a million times. The easiest way for me, just crack it over a clean, dry bowl, pass that yolk back and forth, let the white drop out. If you see anything, those proteins hanging onto the side, knock them in there with the rest of your white, but don't get any yolk in there. And then save your yolks or discard them, whichever you choose. And then I always crack the eggs into a separate bowl than the one I'm going to be mixing them in, just in case I were to get a little bit of yolk in there. I don't want to contaminate all of the eggs I've already cracked. So I'll just add this to my other mixing bowl, crack another one. Number 2. And I actually only need 4 egg whites personally because I have 5 saved from a recipe that I made yesterday that only used egg yolks. Oh. So I always do try to save my egg whites anytime I can. There's so many things that you can make with just egg whites. And look how nice and orange those yolks are. These are from my chicken, so I'm pretty proud of that actually. Number 4, and then I have 5 more right here. Now we're just going to whip these to stiff peaks. You are going to want to use an electric mixer for this step. I have my whisk attachments. Beater attachments would also work. Just make sure they're completely clean, dry, and grease-free. Now I'll start mixing this on a lower speed and I'll gradually increase my speed to high. So a lot of people have asked me if they can use carton egg whites in this recipe, you know, the kind you get at the store. Some people have made it using those with success, some people have not. Usually the carton says it's not supposed to be whipped or that it won't whip properly. So I usually recommend just sticking to fresh eggs that you crack yourself. Anything else is going to be a gamble. Now when I'm making this, I always wait until just before I need the egg whites before whipping them. So I don't like to do it first and let them sit, because if I do, they'll start to like disintegrate. I don't know if that's the right word, but they'll start to kind of fall in on themselves a little bit. I want them at their peak, literally. So we're gonna do this just before we need them. We are getting dangerously close to the top of the bowl here because in classic me fashion, I've selected a bowl that is a little bit too small for the job, but we're gonna power through it. Okay, just wipe that off. And I want to show you exactly what a stiff peak looks like, excuse me. It's important that your eggs be thick, fluffy, glossy. As you can see, they have increased a ton in volume. I'm going to just scrape through the bottom of the bowl. So a stiff peak just means that if you form a peak with the egg whites, this peak doesn't fall in on itself or fold over or dissolve, it stays stiff. You don't want to overdo it with your egg whites either, because then they'll fall in on themselves. But if they're overbeaten, that's just as bad as underbeating them. So it is really a balance. You want to make sure you get just to stiff peaks and then you stop. This looks great, so now we are going to add it to our cake batter. Now do not use your electric mixer for this step, otherwise you will overbeat your egg whites there. So I'm just going to add the egg whites all at once into the bowl. You can see they hold their shape really well. And the reason we do the egg whites like this, there are actually a couple of reasons. One is by just using egg whites, we are going to help maintain that more snow white color of the cake, which was something I was really looking for, trying to get it all when I was developing this recipe. But also, when we whip them to stiff peaks like this, we are just infusing some structure and moisture into the cake batter. So it's going to give it a really nice crumb and a lot of moisture in a way that wouldn't work if we were just to add the egg whites without whipping them. So now I am going to gently fold everything together. It is important that everything be well combined, but you don't want to overdo it. So don't be rough, don't use your electric mixer. Just gently fold the ingredients. Now I'm going to grab my sprinkles. So you can use any color sprinkles you'd like. You're going to need a 1/2 cup of them. Jimmy's, I think is what these are called traditionally, or classic sprinkles. They are going to work best in this recipe. Quin or sequin sprinkles also work well, but I don't recommend nonpareils, which are those teeny tiny little beads, because they really tend to bleed in the cake and they leave you with streaks throughout the batter. So I just stick to these. We'll just keep on folding everything together. Every time I think my bowl is big enough, I learn it's not. Well, it seems I don't learn anything because I keep ending up in the same place week after week. And as I'm cutting through the batter, I'm scraping the bottom, I'm turning it over itself. I'm trying to be conscious of distributing the egg whites really well through the batter without being too aggressive or deflating them. I just love this cake. Okay, nice thing about a glass bowl is I can just kind of peek around it. Make sure everything looks well combined, which it does. I'm going to just do one more stir for good measure. And now I'm going to grab my baking pans, and you're going to need 3 8-inch baking pans for today's recipe, 3 round 8-inch pans. Okay, for your cake pans, you are going to want to either grease and flour the pans or spray them with a baking spray, not a cooking spray. If it's a baking spray, it needs to have flour in it. And for extra insurance, I really recommend you cut yourself out a round of parchment paper, drop that in the bottom. It is the best way to guarantee that your cakes do not stick. You don't want your cakes to stick because that's a lot of time, effort, ingredients wasted. Now, dividing the cake batter evenly is a little bit tricky for me, so I do like to use a scale just because then I weigh exactly how much batter goes into each cake pan, because I am really, really bad at just eyeballing this. Another thing to note about my cake pans is these are pretty deep cake pans. They're like 2 inches deep. That's not super deep or anything, but I do know there's some cake pans out there that are pretty shallow and only 1 inch, so don't use those for this recipe. So for me, this came out to about 725 grams of batter per cake pan. The batter will distribute itself pretty well in the oven, but I still like to just gently smooth it over with my spatula. And then we are off to our oven. These cakes will need to bake in the center rack of your 350-degree Fahrenheit preheated oven for about 35 to 40 minutes, or until a toothpick inserted in the center comes out clean or with a few moist crumbs. Of course, I'll show you what that looks like once these are finished baking. Now, if your oven doesn't bake evenly, it is a good idea to rotate the cake pans halfway through baking. It's also not a bad idea to check each cake individually. Now, when your cakes come out of the oven, they're going to probably be a pretty nice golden color. That does not mean that they're not light and white inside. All right, and as you can see, they are a little bit golden. What I like to test is that if I gently press on the cake, it should spring back lightly. It shouldn't sink in on itself. And again, the toothpick test comes out clean or with some moist crumbs. Either is good. We're going to let these cool in their pans for about 15 minutes, and then I like to run a knife around the outside of the cake to release it from the pan and carefully invert it onto a cooling rack to cool completely cool before we frost it. All right, once your cakes have cooled completely, then we can go ahead and decorate them. I find these cakes typically bake pretty nice and flat, so I don't often level them. Also, it's just going to be my family eating this, so I'm not super worried about the cake not being perfectly level, but of course you can level yours if you prefer. I have a tutorial on how to decorate a cake where I cover that in a little bit more detail. So I'm gonna take my first cake round, first layer of cake. We'll go ahead and frost this real fast. Now for the frosting today, we are using a double batch of my classic vanilla buttercream, just a vanilla frosting, but you can use whatever you'd like. Again, big cake, you're going to need to double a standard sized frosting recipe. Cream cheese is another good choice for this cake, and I love that frosting because it's not too sweet. Layer number 2. Let's grab our third layer. I like to do a little bit of pink frosting on top for some nice color. That one's a little funky, but it'll work. And then of course a couple sprinkles on top because this is a sprinkle cake after all. All right, the moment we've been waiting for. Let's go ahead and cut into this cake. Take a look. I always get really nervous at this part. This is going to be a massive slice of cake. Take a look at that. This is our beautiful, moist, so soft confetti cake. I'm really, really happy that I got to share this one with you today. If you try it out, please leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. I always love hearing from you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is a good cake, my friends. You're gonna love this one. Awkwardly grab the rest of my milk. Ah! This is why you don't wear black when you film. But I want them at their peak, which is funny because they're whipping them to stiff peaks. I wasn't trying to be funny there. Crack myself up sometimes. Do not taste the batter because it hasn't been cooked yet. That would be a big no-no.